Hello and welcome. It's your brother Elihu, the advocate, your proponent for the people in the pews. And we're back with another video to discuss this question of who are the Israelites. Now, if you've been in this awakening for any period of time or this movement, or if you've been paying attention, whether you're a proponent of the movement or you're against the movement, you've seen this scripture probably several times. And it says, "And if ye are Christ, then ye are Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise." And that's Paul speaking in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, verse 29. Now, most people, even on both sides of the argument, tend to kind of stick that scripture to the new covenant as if it's a new thing that arrived when Christ completed his work on the cross. Today, I am going to prove that this is false. In actuality, this has always been a part of the covenant. Even before Christ arrived, Abraham's seed has always been open to everyone. And I know that sounds off because of what we know about biology and what the word seed is supposed to mean. But this scripture right here lets us know that the word seed is not referring to biology. The only difference that I'm proposing here and that I am absolutely going to prove today with scripture is that it has always been that way from the very beginning. So the reason why we're asking this question obviously is because a lot of folks are saying that Black people are Israel, right? And so they say we're bloodline Israel, we're ethnic Israel, we descend from the biology of Jacob, right? And so with that, you have a couple of possibilities. Either some people believe that we're talking about all lineages, no matter who it is, that you're just on the family tree in some way, shape, or form, you're a relative of Jacob. But then other people, read the Bible and understand that there is a heavy leaning towards patrilineage in the Bible. So that means that only your father can carry on that covenant relationship, right? So bloodline is very straightforward, but it may not have anything to do with the covenant, right? Unless you are focusing on very specific parameters, right? And patrilineage may be one of those parameters that God refers to. However, regardless of all of that, it is impossible for anyone to connect themselves biologically to Jacob today. Even the Ashkenazi Jews struggle to connect themselves biologically to Jacob today. It's impossible at this point. So we have to lean on other points of evidence, right? So when I ask the question, what do you mean your bloodline Israel? These are the answers that I've been getting. One, my DNA matches Jewish groups in Africa. Okay, well, the question there becomes, does that mean that your DNA or your bloodline has fulfilled all the criteria for God to include and keep you in what we refer to as Israel? Is there a chance that someone along your bloodline caused your bloodline to be cut off? How do we know that? And most of all, how do we even know that the Jewish group in Africa to which you are connected by your DNA was confirmed? How do we know that God views them as Israel? Those questions haven't been answered yet. But then the next way that we kind of identify, or this is really Hebrew Israelite rhetoric that I'm referring to, is that if you are a descendant of American slaves, then you're an Israelite. Well, again, based on what? based on the fact that people who were referred to as Jews were observed as Jews, or even were commonly understood to the point where it was common knowledge that they were Jews, were sold into the slave trade. Even if that is true, do they meet God's criteria? Were they confirmed by God or by the scriptures that though that group of people were Jews or were true Hebrews or Israelites? Not only that, but we also have to deal with the issue of the percentage, like how many of the slaves were Israelites and how many were not. Are we saying that 100% of the slaves that were sold into America were Israelites? Because that's what would be necessary in order for us to say all descendants of slaves are Israel, right? So those both have extremely shaky ground, but the answer that I actually respect the most is this one. If you fit the prophecies, then you are bloodline Israel. But this makes it extremely important that we fully understand how God defines the seed of Jacob. Because what we're saying is that God in his omniscience is watching us and he knows exactly who he owes a promise for curses and blessings. And he is exacting that promise today. Well, that means that we ought to know who he is saying is who, right? And I know you can it's easy to say that the Ruach told me, right? Um, and nobody can really argue with you on that, right? But from my position in the pews, I need to know how God defines Israel before I start holding God's feet to the fire for promises that he made. It's just important to me, and I hope it's important to you. And now I'm going to prove that Israel, the title itself, has always been open, and it was never about a bloodline. And I am going to explain to you what the importance of the bloodline is. But the title of Israel, being Israel, was never confined to a genetic pool. In order to follow God's definition of Israel, we have to follow the covenant. And so the covenant, according to Israel, starts with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. So let's just read through these scriptures where the covenant is confirmed and defined. Now Jehovah said unto Abraham, or Abram, get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto the land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and be thou a blessing. And I will be them, bless them that bless thee, and him that curseth thee will I curse. The reason why I kind of fumbled there was because I really wanted to kind of come back, because there's another part here that I didn't highlight that's actually kind of telling. Because right here it says, and be thou a blessing. I used to think that it's just kind of the words were jumbled together and he was saying that you will be a blessing. But actually this is a command. If you read it, he says, I'm gonna make your name great so that you can be a blessing. So you better be a blessing. You be a blessing. It's a command. And we say that all the time. We understand that in Christianity today, God blesses you so you can bless others. And this is a consistent theme throughout the entirety of this covenant description. And he says it right here, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And I'm telling you, he says this over and over and over ad nauseum when he's talking to his people. Then he goes to Genesis 17:12, 1 through 14, and we have clear evidence that DNA is not going to capture everyone who is Israel, period. And it comes with the law of circumcision, where he says, and he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every male throughout your generations. He that is born in thy house, or bought with money of any foreigner that is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised. And then he says, what? My covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. This literally means that this establishes his covenant in the flesh of all who are circumcised. That means everyone who is circumcised, God owes this promise at this point, right? And the uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. So not only does he establish that the covenant is with people both in and outside of Abraham's genetic pool, but he certifies here that the covenant is conditional right here. So the covenant didn't become conditional at Mount Sinai. It was always conditional. Then the covenant, gets passed on to Isaac. And all we need to read here is Genesis 17, verse 21, where it says, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac. So that's God talking. That means he literally confirmed that he was going to establish the covenant with Isaac and not Isaac's half brother Ishmael or any of the other brothers or sisters of Isaac. Genesis 26, 3 through 5. This is where God is establishing the covenant again with Isaac as an adult. And I'm going to read it. It says, sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these lands. So all of the same promises God is giving to Isaac. I will establish the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. So it's the same covenant that came from Abraham. And I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and will give unto the seed, thy seed, all these lands, and in the seed, thy seed, shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. He keeps saying it. Now, you can't tell me that that doesn't go along with the concept of the title of Israel, or the covenant being inclusive of people that are outside of this genetic pool. And then it says here again, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge. So again, he reiterates it again. This is a conditional covenant. Then it gets passed to Jacob. There's a hint here when God tells Isaac that the elder shall serve the younger. So this refers to the elder being Esau and the younger being Jacob. You guys all know these scriptures. And then it's again established with Jacob that the covenant is being passed to him and not Esau. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, Jehovah stood above it and said, I am Jehovah, the God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. So it is the same covenant, same God. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. But I have this highlighted for a reason, right? Because I'm about to prove that second point once again, with a third witness. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. What does this mean? This means that Israel, the land of Israel, never had boundaries. It was always boundless. It was always intended to spread across the entire world. Honestly, this is the first notion of world domination. And if you really be technical, you could see how the actual protocols of Zion come out of this. It's kind of a bastardization of this scripture, because it's always been a plan for God to take over the world. And if you are a Christian, you want that, right? But that's always been the plan. Now, is this because Jacob is just so fertile that he has so many kids that he needs the entire world and he's just going to spread and kill everybody else? No. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families be annihilated? No. All of the families of the earth shall be blessed. It was always a part of the plan. Then he establishes the covenant with the nation of Israel, right? First, we get the idea of the 12 tribes of Israel in Genesis chapter 49, verse 28, where it says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And just to, prove the point here, let me, all right, so Genesis chapter 49, it says, and Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the latter days. And he told them all these things. He told it to Reuben, Simeon, Levi. All of the sons of Jacob are listed here. And then it says, it gives us basically a comment on this. And it says, all these, a prophetic comment here, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. Exodus 24:7. And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people. And they said, all that Jehovah has spoken, we will do and be obedient. So where are we in Exodus 24? Now we have exited Egypt and we have arrived at Mount Sinai as a people. And they all have accepted the covenant. But you know what's coming next. Most of you guys who have been debating these things over and over again know that the mixed multitude is coming. I got to talk about it. Why? Because it again proves the concept of God's heart for the whole world, not just Israel. It says a mixed multitude went up also with them. So this is in Exodus chapter 12, just after the last plague and after Pharaoh has said, you guys can get out of here, or actually he kicked them out, right? And it says a mixed multitude went with them. Where did they go? They went to Mount Sinai. Were they separated and somewhere else when the covenant was established here in Exodus 24:7 that I just read? No, they were right there with them. How do I know that? Because 10 verses later, after it says a mixed multitude went with them, God establishes the Passover with the people, and he makes this provision again. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to Jehovah, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. That means bring him into the fold. No, that just means that they can hang out on the outside and be second-class citizens. Really? Is that why he said here, and he shall be as one that is born in the land? No. This was the heart of God. We're not just talking about words. We're not just talking about literal translations. We're talking about understanding the heart of God. And that was to bring the whole world back into relationship with Him, using Abraham as an example and establishing a culture and a covenant with Abraham and his seed that everyone could cling to and be named as Israel. And therefore, the mixed multitude that had this heart, had this in mind, that were saying, your God is God for real. I want to worship your God. Those who had that mindset were there, and they accepted the covenant, and they became as one that is born in the land. They were there. So now we have this completely mixed bag of genetic material that are there as they're accepting the covenant at Mount Sinai. The mixed multitude is kind of a character in this I guess this awakening or this debate, this discussion, because they seem to have caused some problems. But I do want to kind of take some of the pressure off of the mixed multitude on this. In Numbers 11:4, it says the mixed multitude was among them, lusted exceedingly. And then it says, and the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish we did eat in Egypt. And so a lot of people say the mixed multitude was influencing them. No. What the problem that we see here is a lack of intimacy with God and a robust intimacy between Israel, or the children of Israel, and Egypt. It is no different than what we have today. Both the mixed multitude and the Israelites were Egyptians. They weren't in intimate relationship with God. It didn't matter that they saw all of the miracles that he did. They saw 10 plagues. They saw him split the Red Sea. They saw him, or the Reed Sea, or whatever. I don't know, whatever it is. But they saw him appear as a wall of fire to protect them from the Egyptians. They saw him close up the Reed Sea over the Egyptians and kill them. They saw God follow or lead them as a cloud in the daytime and as a pillar of fire by night. They saw God on the mountain speaking to Moses. All of these things they saw, but they didn't have any intimacy with God. So it didn't matter that the mixed multitude was with them. That was on Israel, because Israel was not Israel at this point. They had lost the intimacy that Abraham had with God, that Isaac had with God, that Jacob had with God. They had lost it in Egypt. So don't blame that on the mixed multitude and try to say, well, that because of that, they were this second-class citizen. Because there's no other place that this mixed multitude was even mentioned. It was almost as if they completely blended in with the rest of the crowd. And the only other time that the mixed multitude is mentioned is in a similar situation as what was going on in Egypt when they were captive in Persia, and Nehemiah got the favor of God in order to rebuild the temple and rebuild the people again. And so what's going on here is the people are under submission and oppression under Persia, and people are seeing, look, these guys are getting ready to start worshiping their God again. I believe in their God. So it was other people, mixed multitude of people that wanted to believe in their God at that time as well. It was not the same group of people 1,000 years later. All right. So the mixed multitude is Israel to varying degrees. Here are some more strangers that get added into Israel. Rahab. Remember, Rahab was the one, the harlot, whose name meant wide open road, which literally means she was wide open. She was a harlot of harlots. But she believed in God. And she told the Israelites, man, we heard about your God, and your God is the real God. Please, I am going to, at the risk of losing my life, I'm going to help you spies, but you guys, please let me be a part of what you guys have going on. So she became an Israelite. It literally, the word literally says that she dwelt with them all her days. I'm sorry, I kind of freestyled that, but that's just the whole story for Rahab. And then we have Ruth, who interestingly is a Moabite. And we're going to see why that's important here in a minute. But it says, entreat me not to leave thee, and to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. I have to point out why this is important, because I know up until now this is sounding kind of like an urban apologetic type of position, or a orthodox position, right? But there's a problem even with the orthodox position from my purview, because the way Rahab and Ruth approached their entry into Israel is not the same way that Rome or any of the European third or second or third century churches entered into Israel, according to what I have seen and read on my own. There is a problem here, because in order to become part of Israel, like I said, it started with the slaves. You could be a son and be a part of the seed, and that's very straightforward, but you could also be a slave to Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, and you would be subjected to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's mentality, their culture, their laws, their way of life. If you come under subjection, then you become Israel. But what we see throughout the history of Israel is that when people come in and they form alliances with Israel, an alliance basically means that I'm going to come in, we're going to be kind of like the same people. We're going to fight the same wars. We're going to be on the same side. But listen, I'm going to do my culture and you're going to do your culture. And maybe in some ways, we're going to kind of mix our cultures. That does not qualify as Israel. The church today has formed an alliance with Israel. And to be honest with you, what has really happened with the church today is they came in like a Trojan horse, forming an alliance first with Israel, but then in the back door, actually saying, haha, actually, we are Israel now. As a matter of fact, we're going to change the name Israel to church. That's what I see. And I am sitting in the pews. Like I said, I am not ordained. I've never been to seminary. And some of y'all are like, yeah, well, we can tell you ain't gone to seminary. Yeah, you're right. I have gone to seminary because I have not been indoctrinated with the stuff that they have been teaching. One of the hallmark signs that they formed an alliance and actually a hostile takeover of Israel with this Christianity thing is the fact that they completely did away with the feast days. There was no reason to do that. There was no reason to do that. It would not have hurt anybody's faith to keep Passover, to keep tabernacles, to keep first fruits. There was no reason for that. Yet it happened. Why? Because there was an alliance. There was not a subjection. The church is not subject to Christ. That's why we hang Jesus up next to Santa Claus during our holidays. That's why we hang Jesus up next to the Easter Bunny, because it's an alliance. It's not subjection. But anyway, Rahab and Ruth are both on the line of succession to King David, who is in the line of succession to Jesus Christ. So you can't say that they were just second-class citizens. Now, how do you get cut off from being the bloodline? Right? Well, first of all, it said it again in the very beginning, Genesis chapter 17, verse 14. It says, if you're not circumcised, then you're cut off. All right, cool. That was the law at that time. Deuteronomy 23, 1 through 3. He that is wounded in the stones or hath his privy member cut off shall not enter into the assembly of Jehovah. Okay, so if you are a eunuch, specifically, you cannot be a part of this assembly. If you don't have a father, you can't enter into this assembly. If you're an Ammonite or a Moabite, he said, you can't enter in even to the 10th generation forever. But then there's an inconsistency, right? And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're dealing with what I found is that if you're dealing with inconsistencies in the Bible, I would venture, I have a theory that there is a very simple answer to every inconsistency that you can find in the Bible. And that is that God was never looking for moral righteousness. He was always looking for relationship. If you desire a relationship with God, with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, you are counted as righteous. And it literally does not matter what you do morally. If you wholeheartedly desire a relationship with God, you're considered righteous. And guess what? You're also considered of the tribes of Israel. Because in Isaiah 56, 3 through 8, he kind of reverses some of these things prophetically. He says, neither let the foreigner that hath joined himself to Jehovah speak, saying, Jehovah will surely separate me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree, for thus saith Jehovah of the eunuchs that keep my Sabbath. He's just using eunuchs as an example. He's saying, even if you're a eunuch, I know it's in the law that if you're a eunuch, you're not supposed to be a part of Israel. But he says, even of the eunuchs, if you keep my Sabbaths and choose the things that please me and hold fast my covenant. What does that mean? Covenant, the best illustration of a covenant is a marriage. So literally what he's saying, anyone who desires to have a marriage, an intimate relationship with me, above all else, unto them, verse 5, will I give in my house, and within my walls, not outside the walls, but within my walls, a memorial and a name, what? Better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. What that says to me, and you can come up with all the arguments that you want, but what it says to me, when I consider the heart of God, the character of God, as I travel through the scriptures, what that says to me is that, yeah, there may be a hierarchy, but it means that someone who is not supposed to be a part of the assembly would have a higher rank, not a hierarchy based on your DNA. That's Isaiah speaking. So what about the references to the lost sheep, right? What about this idea that Jesus came for the lost sheep only, right? He says it at least a couple times. Actually, he says it several times. You know, first he sends the 12 disciples out, and he says, "But don't go to the Gentiles or to the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Right? And then when he's talking to the Syrophoenician woman, or mentioned here in the ASV, the Canaanitish woman, we see this story here where the woman is crying out after her, and it says, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a demon." But it says he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, "Send her away, for she crieth after us." But he answered and said, "I was not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and worshiped him. This is what started to flip it. She said, "Lord, help me." And he answered and said, so now he's gone from just ignoring her to answering her. And he said, "It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs." He literally called her a dog. Why did he do that? He was trying to see how humble she was. He was trying to see if she was trying to come in by an alliance or if she was coming in as a servant. And what was her response? She said, "But yea, Lord, for even the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from the master's table." Then Jesus answered and said unto her, "O woman, great is thy faith." He was testing her. Why? Because he knew that it has always been a part of the plan for everybody to be in the kingdom. But the plan was for those who have the advantage of having received the oracles of God, direct contact with God, to be in charge. The original plan was to build them up to where they have a land, they have dominion, they have a position above everyone else, a position of complete authority in the world first. And then the Gentiles can come in. Because then the Israelites wouldn't have any reason to form an alliance. It's either what God says or the highway. This is what this thing is all about. This title of Israel has always been about being subject to God. We all know that God established a new covenant. But like I said, this thing it's like a marriage. That's the best analogy that can be made for a covenant. Because what happened with Abraham or Abram in Genesis chapter 12 was like, the couple coming together and saying, I think I'd like to be married. I think I'd like to spend the rest of my life with you. And then when they did the circumcision, it was like the actual proposal and making an actual commitment. It says the covenant was established, right? Now, established sounds like a very concrete word, like it's established and it will never change. But how many people know that covenants have to be reestablished and reestablished and reestablished? Just like a marriage. You establish your covenant with one another when you have a wedding ceremony and you say, with this ring, I thee wed. But then you know that you have to reestablish that covenant every time you have an argument with your spouse, right? Because what happens? You have an argument and you discuss things, you go back and forth, and both of you start to figure out there are certain things that I can do and certain things that I cannot do and have and maintain a relationship with this person. And so y'all have the discussion and y'all make it very clear which things you can do and which things you cannot do in order to build a relationship with the other person. And that reestablishes the covenant. And hopefully each one of you say, okay, I'm committed to not doing that anymore, or I'm committed to doing my best to do what you've asked me to do. That's a reestablishment of the covenant. But then as you get more mature in your relationship, you start to realize that you asked your spouse to do some things out of complete and total insecurity, right? Or you've even asked her to do some things, or she's asked him to do some things just to test them and see how committed they are to the relationship. But once that commitment is completely established, what happens? You start to find out that the other person doesn't really feel as strongly about what they've said they wanted them to do. All of a sudden, it's okay that you clip your toenails in the bed. All of a sudden, your passing gas doesn't really bother me as much. It was never really an issue, right? I just wanted to know that you cared about being sexy around me all the time or whatever. And a new covenant is established, right? One that's not predicated on specific things that you want the person to do and them following the rules. But now it's really just based on a mutual and completely secure understanding that you both love one another, and that above and beyond anything else, the relationship that y'all have is what's most important. That's a mature relationship. That's what the new covenant was. That's why it was a better covenant. That's why Jesus Christ came. But this is also why it says here in Galatians 3:27 through 29, yet another popular verse. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ did put on Christ. There can be neither Jew nor Greek. There can be neither bond nor free, nor male nor female. For ye are all one man in Christ Jesus. And if ye are Christ, then are ye Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise. Let's move on. Conclusions. I've already made all my conclusions. I made the conclusion at the beginning. The Israelite title has always been open to everyone who is willing to cling to God, right? And it's always been, regardless of their DNA. There is no covenant attached to your DNA. It's always been attached to your position with God. Those who he knows are his people will go through trials and tribulations until they get their relationship with him in order. That's what it's always been. And in order to be part of Israel, you have to be subjected to God. It started with Abraham. And if you're subject to Abraham through sonship or as a slave, then you're Israel. When it trickled down to Israel, You had to be subjected to Israel, not in alliance with Israel. Not a pretty woman from Philistia or some other country coming in and manipulating and changing the minds of the Israelite men. No, you have to be like Ruth. You have to be like Rahab in order to become Israel. If Samson had children with Delilah and he raised them to be half Delilah and half him, as a matter of fact, they probably would have been all Delilah. Whether they were males or females, they would not be Israel. Period. But today, now that it has trickled down through the flesh, it says it was confirmed in the flesh. The covenant was passed into Christ, and he fulfilled the covenant. Now we all have to be subject to Christ because he's the only one. He's the only connection that we have on this earth right now. If Abraham was still living, we could be under Abraham because he had a covenant directly with God. But that was the only importance of the bloodline. What about the regathering, right? God is going to regather all who have subjected themselves to him, not genetic descendants of Israel. Those who live their lives as if God is real and always present. The only example of that we have right now of how to do that is Jesus Christ himself. He lived his life as if God was absolutely real, even though God was not manifesting himself like he was manifested on Mount Sinai. One day I'll tell you guys how I feel about that whole Sinai experience, but they missed a grand opportunity at Sinai for extreme intimacy with God. Honestly, I believe that Israel at Mount Sinai would have been the world's Messiah if they had done what God asked them to do at Mount Sinai before they received the written law. But that's a whole other discussion. I'm going to end this thing here. I hope this thing was a blessing. If you have questions for me, of course, you can leave it in the chat. My email is in the About section, I believe. If it's not, then I'll make sure I put it up there. You guys can reach out to me anytime. Honestly, the reason why I'm doing these videos is because a lot of people are being led astray. The Israelite movement has had some wonderful aspects to it, but at this point, the momentum is so strong and heavy in the wrong direction that I think we're going to really struggle to pull some people out of the falsehoods. It doesn't matter how little sense it actually makes for anyone to say that they are an Israelite at this point by blood, because you can't connect yourself through DNA. You can't connect yourself by blood. You don't have genealogies. You don't have proof that anybody is Israel. And the people that the whole world feels is Israel, you're saying are not Israel. So it can't be by public opinion. There's nothing that we can really latch on to say I'm Israel by blood. But yet again, it turns out that even in the scriptures, not just in the New Testament, but all the way from the very beginning of this covenant that was established with Abraham, Israel, the title, has always been open to the whole world. God bless you guys. I hope you guys have a blessed and wonderful week. And I will talk to you guys at the next video.